Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. I hope everyone's as nervous as I am. I'm Beatriz. I'm the curator at iniva, which is the Institute of International Visual Arts. Thanks, Jasmine, Naomi, and Connie for being here and joining me. So I'm just going to start with a brief introduction and then start with the questions just to contextualize a little bit. So the idea of discussing and creating a decentralized curatorial voice is started with my experience at the New Bridge Project, which is an artist-led organization in the northeast of England. And I worked there alongside Naomi, who is here now. And at the New Bridge, we composed what we call the program team. We don't have a curator there. And every year we have a call out and we select a program committee. And then this committee will propose the program for the following year. I'm not familiar with other organizations that run in this exact same model, but I did start thinking about other ways in which we can decentralize the curatorial voice. And over the years, I've been meeting people from organizations that have proposed a non-hierarchical or experimental ways of organizing. And I also thought that could be good examples. So for example, there is In Situ in the north of England, where they have a flat pay across the organization, and they propose a horizontal structure across every member of staff. And there's also Performing Borders, which is a digital platform. And they also adopted the flat pay, and they also, that reflects on the decision-making process across the organization, from the curatorial to governance. Everything is thought through collectively. And then at iniva, just from where I'm working right now, we're heading into the third year of Future Collect, which is a program that is designed to transform the culture of commissioning and collecting. With the idea is to reflect on the diversity of Britain. So each year we partner with a museum and we commission an artist from African or Asian descent, and that commission will integrate the collection then. And we also bring a curatorial trainee, and the curatorial trainee will be the one curating the exhibitions. So through that process, which take over a year, we are challenging the museum on their collecting and exhibiting practice. And then when I invited Naomi, Jasmine, and Connie to be here to compose this panel, I was thinking about each of them standing from a different perspective, from artist-led, community-led, and global perspectives, but it became quite clear that they all intersect and they all reflect on each other. So let's start with Naomi. Since you have worked at the New Bridge Project, I think it would be really good if you could speak a little bit more about the program committee, the curatorial format, how it shaped the organization, and also the challenge that it represented for you as a curator.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to firstly say thanks, Beatriz, for inviting us here on this panel. It's a real privilege to be here with Jasmine and Connie, so thank you. So yeah, you've touched on it lightly. So the New Bridge Project is an artist-led space. It's probably worth me mentioning a little bit more about what it is and how it functions. So it's based in the north of England. It was set up originally 10 years ago by two graduates graduating from the fine art course in Newcastle. And it was basically set up to provide cheap studio and working spaces for artists in the region. In that time, when it was first established, it didn't receive any funding. It was housed in a disused office block, and the council kind of gave the artists that space for free to use. Over the years, it's changed. It's now recognised as a charity. It's funded by the Arts Council and government, and receives local council funding as well. So it's really developed and changed over the years, and it's now got a larger team from 2 up to about 11 now. So really, really changed. When it established itself as an NPO or a charity, there was discussions that, you know, it really needed to change and diversify its programming. So in the beginning, it was kind of artists took over the space, their friends were welcomed in, people put their work in the gallery, and that's how it functioned. It was first come, first serve. But now, like I say, it operates under a program committee. And again, as you've mentioned, that functions because it's kind of stripping away the kind of hierarchical decision making within the organization. When I was there, obviously my role was program director. And as you'd mentioned, we had a rolling program committee that would work as a 12-month program. It was a development program, really. And that changed and developed each year. In my time there, it expanded. So there was 12 people part of that program committee, which was pretty huge and pretty a lot to manage. And I'll go into that a little bit in the challenges. But basically, the committee, like you say, it was there to represent a diverse range of voices, to bring in different ideas about methodologies, approaches to programming, and that's how it kind of functioned, which was, you know, really, really great. I mean, to set, obviously, President Newbridge is based in Newcastle. Newcastle is in the north of England. It's one of the poorest regions in the UK. So, you know, it's quite challenging for artists to kind of gain traction, to get space, to be able to afford space. So Newbridge is a pretty amazing space for young graduating emerging artists. And, you know, it's pretty much a grassroots space. Some of the challenges that I know you want me to talk about is, again, money. As an MPO, Newbridge is actually the lowest funded MPO in the country, so it receives the least amount of funding.
Sorry, could you just explain what NPO is for the American audience?
Yeah, so again, it's a national portfolio, so it sits under a charity bracket which receives funding from the government under Arts Council money. And a non-profit organisation, yeah, absolutely. So it's both as well. So yeah, it receives the least amount of funding from the Arts Council under that kind of charitable status. So money was always an issue, and that kind of came with the ambition of delivering a 12-month program with 12 quite eager young emerging curators. So there was a lot of egos to manage, there was a lot of ambition and capacity to manage. So it was slightly challenging doing that as one person, until then you came in to be able to assist on that as well. So yeah, those are some of the challenges. Also, as you can imagine, with little money, we could only kind of literally pay people a kind of tokenistic payment to kind of be part of that committee, which was hugely challenging and it was hugely problematic. So as you can imagine, people who applied for that committee could only be part of that committee if they had, you know, certain support, certain structures in place, and could afford financially to be able to do that. So again, that was, you know, that was part of the problem with getting a wide range of diverse people part of that committee, which, you know, was always a challenge. And I know through our time, me and you chatted about that quite a lot, Beatrice, and I know Newbridge is now changing its model to be able to now pay artists and curators fairly to be part of that committee, which is so important, you know. Other challenges, quite selfishly, I always felt as a curator and as a program director in that organisation, you're always delivering other people's kind of ideas. So we would get a lot of people coming to the committee who, you know, part of the committee, the process was to have discussions and open discussions as a group to think what we want to do, what the narratives are, what we want to programme for the next year at Newbridge. But people would come and they would just be like, I want to deliver this project, I'm not shifting on that. And again, it didn't serve everyone who was part of the committee or even the local community that we were trying to deliver the program to. So that was a huge challenge. And again, that came with egos and people, you know, having a particular idea about what they wanted to do. So that was always a challenge.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for your honesty. I know that's, yeah, it's really hard when you have an idea and you end up just facilitating other people's ideas, but I guess that's part of the democratic process. Okay, so for Connie, thank you for being here as well. Lovely to see your face. I really love how Decolonizing the Archive introduced itself saying, quote, history is healing. We cannot decolonize what was never ours to begin with, but we can always create, end quote. And I was able to experience an example of it with one of your sessions from the project at University of Repair, where you created a space for community consultation within the Museum of Docklands in London. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit more about how Decolonizing the Archive started and help us understand how it represents a Pan-African archive. You're muted. It's 2020.
Always the one, isn't it?
Still
Jeez.
doing that.
All right. Hi, everybody. How are you doing? Okay, great. So thank you, Beatriz. Thanks, everyone. I wish I was there in New York with you, but I'll just imagine. So I'll tell you a bit about Decolonizing the Archive. We started about, it's going in 10 years now, and we're a grassroots organization, one of the only decolonizing Black-led archive challenging organizations, not an institution, an organization here in England. We're based in London. And to answer your question, we gave that motto, that whole slogan out, because the truth is, when you think about colonization and the whole system that has been erected from colonization, we're not a part of that story. We didn't do that. We didn't initiate that practice. We weren't in that planning. It happened to us. And so when we say that we can never decolonize that particular, it means that it would take the actual persons who came up with that system of oppression to recognize in and of themselves that they are the ones that need to disrupt that system. But having said that, within that framework, we also recognize that the actual people of whom these systems of unjust oppression have to take agency in redeeming their own liberation and creating their own spaces that will facilitate, freedom of expression, representation, accessibility, and economics to a sustainable living. So when we talk about decolonizing the archive, we talk about decolonizing the way that we have thought and learned about approaches to understanding ourselves through the archives. And as such, archives become more an active tool as opposed to a tool of oppression and administration to keep people in order and in place. So in regards to your question of the Pan-African archive, when we think of Pan-Africanism, we think of the multifaceted and the multi-layered representation of an African-centered heritage. And so how does that heritage present itself? And so we recognize that it's a continued action done by people of that heritage to create brotherhood and sisterhood, and to collapse forms of oppression, and to also facilitate all people of African-centered heritage to be able to come together and to work together and to collaborate together to create their own freedom.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Connie. Yeah, we will definitely talk a little bit more about the archive as an active space really soon. But yeah, amazing work you guys are doing. Jasmine, so I understand that the project for Empty Space started as a public intervention. And I wonder if you could give us some more examples of the works that you've done around that, around public space, and talk about the role of Project for Empty Space in community building.
Sure. I feel like that's a multi-part question, but I'll go with it. You're going to have to remind me about the different parts. As far as public intervention, yes, we did start out as a nomadic project, and we actually were never, or I never envisioned it being an organization per se. It was really truly a one-off intervention that organically grew first in New York City, and then as a series of collaborative partnerships in other cities around the world. And this was about 12 years ago. And so we were doing public site-specific interventions with artists in blighted or neglected city-owned spaces in New York, and then doing similar projects. One we did in Bogota, for example. And I know that it was 12 years ago because this was the early time of video streaming. And so we would be live streaming programs from start to finish with artists and curators based in those cities as they were developed. And, you know, one of the fringe benefits, I guess, or few, not fringe benefits, silver linings of the pandemic is now Zoom and being so familiar with it. At that time, we were not. But you know, this project really evolved in a way out of collaboration and sort of a lateral approach to collaborating in different cities so as not to be sort of a parachute project. And our role now in Newark, New Jersey as a brick and mortar space also happened sort of fortuitously and organically, where we were doing a collaboration there, which turned into 6 collaborations, very similar actually to you, in a space that was given to us that had been neglected in an office building adjacent to a train station for many years. And then that space was given to us to sort of develop a multi-centric program for artists with artist studios and curatorial programs. But in spite of having that, or in addition to having that brick and mortar space, it's also very important for us to be multi-centric in being centering artists, but also our local geographic community. And so we do that not only through the things that happen within our gallery and residency spaces and our artist studios, but also by continuing to do public interventions in Newark. So mural programs, temporal activations with sort of a multi-demographic or demographic-less population in the city. Again, really sort of leaning into multi-centricity and lateral thinking as our approach versus I think what is sometimes the easier way of being singularly centric. Did that answer both parts of the question?
Yeah, you actually did. Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, no, you definitely did. I'm just thinking about it. Yeah, no, you definitely did. Yeah, it seems to be, it's amazing to see like different places in completely different locations, like that have understood some answers for certain communities, and that is like investing on the difference, like investing on like having like a multi layered approach and being responsive. Yeah, no, that's definitely really
Can
amazing.
I add one thing
Oh yeah,
to that? You know, what I notice about all of our projects is they happen in places that are historically on the margins, whether geographically left out of the socio-political space or not just geographic, but community-wise. And so we're kind of meeting a need out of a place of scarcity or neglect from, you know, higher ups, whether those higher ups be governmental or people in power, however you want to think about people in power, and sort of the structures of capitalism. And so what we're doing, I think, is again out of this place of scarcity and need. And one of the things that I think is a sort of interesting thing to posit into the world is, how do we, as I imagine, Connie, for you as well, you know, there's a struggle that happens, right? Particularly financially, when you are working in spaces that no one else historically has wanted to touch, and you do it because you're either part of that community or you see the need for it. But how do we pivot from a place of scarcity to a place of abundance? And so that it is our abundance serving our communities, and we're not sort of in this cycle of continuous struggle or chase.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. Okay, so Naomi, so you started your new job at Baltic, taking up this new position, just called Curator, brackets, local. I actually would like to understand what the local means for the curatorial work. And I would invite you to reflect on the challenge of going from a very small scale organization to one of the largest institutions in the country.
Yeah, it's a shift, and a shift. So to put into perspective, I mentioned earlier that Newbridge is the lowest funded MPO in the country, whilst Baltic, where I am now at, is the largest funded MPO in the country. So it's a big institution. It's second to Tate in the UK. It's a non-collecting contemporary art gallery, which again is fortunate. It's based in Newcastle and Gateshead, in the region where I'm from, live and work. So yeah, I think one of the things that's really interesting about Baltic is it does amazing learning programs. It does amazing outreach programs. We've just launched a Baltic bus that is driving around different various regions in the north of England to take art to people and different community groups, and it's pretty amazing. But one thing that it does, I think, in the past number of years has really missed out on is kind of bridging that gap between big international artists and local artists in the region. And I think it's kind of looked, well, it's kind of been from the sidelines watching organizations like Newbridge and seeing the amazing work that they're doing with local communities and local artists and kind of wanting to be actually part of that. So I think that's why they developed the role of Curator Local, which is a bit odd, the brackets, but still, but one of the things that's been pretty amazing is as soon as coming into the role, Baltic were really interested in developing an arts development program, which is something they've never done before. They do programs, they do workshops, and it ties in, but it's mostly through the learning program. So it was really interested that they wanted to set the precedent for collaborating with the likes of Newbridge and other arts-led spaces to develop an arts development program. And again, it wasn't kind of replicating what those were already doing, but thinking about how can a big institution like Baltic with a lot of resources support these smaller grassroots organizations. So that's really, really interesting. And it's something that we've been establishing since I joined in November. Again, like I say, it's been about bridging that gap and looking for what them gaps are and thinking about how Baltic as that institution can do that. And one of the important things to mention about the region where we live is young graduates coming out of art school are feeling pretty much forced to move to London to kind of, gain success, get them opportunities. There's not a lot of opportunities in the region. So artists over the past number of years have really felt, that is what they need to do. But the prices in London for living, for studio is just extortionate. So yeah, so a lot of artists are now feeling forced to stay in the region. So what I'm trying to do with the programming at Baltic is thinking about how we create a lot more opportunities through our resources that we have to kind of wanting to keep artists in the region. I'm from the region, so for me, it's it's great to be able to do that. Again, it comes with challenges. Baltic's been around for about 20 years now. It does big international shows, and the thing I'm finding is a lot of it's to do with trust. So a lot of artists in the region, predominantly artists who've been there for about 10 years, they've been kind of had the odd opportunity here and there, but for them, they want to get inside of Baltic. They want to demystify Baltic. They want to know how you get there, how you have a show there. So for them, it's all about trust. And I'm finding the conversations I'm trying to have with artists locally is about demystifying what Baltic is and actually demystifying what that role as a curator is, because a lot of the time in big institutions, curators do remain faceless. For me, it's pretty easy in the region because the region's quite small that I can head from one preview and be at another preview in 10 minutes. So it's trying to be visible and making sure that there's a face, as that curator local that people feel they can approach. They can ask me, they can, even send me proposals, speak to me about opportunities. So I'm kind of working through that at the moment, which is really amazing. But yeah, those are some of the challenges that we are facing. It's also making sure that, through them conversations that, language is a big, and me and Beatriz talk about that a lot, but kind of again, that demystifying what the roles of these big institutions are and how they can open their doors and be a lot more active for, like you say, emerging artists and kind of those grassroots initiatives who are working, in the region.
Yeah, no, of course. I think what I'm hearing is a lot about sharing and being generous and open and listening to other people, which I know you do. So Jasmine, you actually did the opposite journey. So you went from, you left your position as social justice curator, which is a beautiful title, at the Bronx Museum. I don't know if it does what it does, but what it says, but to focus on the project for Empty Space. And could you explain what this transition meant for your curatorial practice and how it informed the work that you do with communities?
Yes. So I guess one sort of clarifying thing is I didn't actually ever leave Project for Empty Space. I just did 2 full-time jobs, which I think a lot of people in this room can empathize with that multi-hyphenate experience. What it did for me in sort of leaving the more formal institutional space and shifting back to a smaller nonprofit space was, I think it taught me about my sort of orientation and goals as a curator. And something that had started actually almost right before I joined the museum was I had done an exhibition, co-curated and co-produced an exhibition called Abortion is Normal, which I guess in some ways got me quite a bit of flack from anti-abortion people, I guess. But starting then and then through my time at the museum, I realized that the shows that I'm making are no longer sort of positioned in trying to educate people on the outside of the validity of my experience or my existence or other people's existences, but was to curate shows for people and sort of my intersecting communities as a way for us to be visible, not just to other people in this sort of bell jar kind of way, but to be visible to each other, to validate each other where validation may feel necessary, and also to sort of throw up a bat signal, or I know this is a sort of negative term, but like a dog whistle to say that we are here and we exist and we hold these positions of power and we are powerful in and of ourselves. And so that was a big takeaway for me working in an institutional space that purported to be one thing, but was lackluster at best in performing what it had set out to perform. And so I sort of took all of that good, bad, and ugly experience and have used it in thinking about not only my own curatorial work and Project for Empty Spaces work, but also in thinking about lateralizing our emphasis on large institutions, both for artists and communities, and thinking about how we can pivot so we're not always putting the biggest and most funded on a pedestal, but thinking again, I sound like a broken record, but like thinking in this multi-centric way about how an ecosystem relies on all sizes and levels of curatorial projects and organizations to function in the cultural space.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, when you talk about being visible, I think makes me think a lot about how sometimes large institutions think that making someone visible is enough, and actually visibility is not really power. So there is a lot more work to do than just
putting me on the front of your brochure isn't really doing very much for me.
No, yeah, exactly. Yes. So Connie, right, I'm interested in how Decolonizing the Archive created a new methodology to archiving, and how it is a lot about like a practice-led approach. You're talking about archive as an active space and an active practice. And I would love to hear more, first, why you decided to create a new methodology, and if you could break it down for us, the 3 steps of selecting, sampling, and sharing.
No problem at all. So I love what Naomi and Jasmine just said, because basically what they've said can filter into my answer. It's those very problems of the vernacular within the curatorial space and the inaccessibility of artists who do not have that leverage game going on for them to get access into spaces, especially that are more placed geographically in the city, and that inaccessibility based upon who how you've learned, the school you went to, all of those things. These are the reasons why we at DTA decided to create a methodology that was very much action-centered, because we saw too much of the talking going on within the spaces of the privileged spaces, so to speak. And being a Black led organization. And I'm stressing the Black led because in Britain, we have our own experience. I know in America, you guys have your own story and narrative, but we definitely have one going on in the UK, where the identity issue and the representation issue and the denial of our government that even exists in 2022, with our prime minister, coming out with reports saying that there's no such thing as racism in Britain. So yeah, so to keep it on track, let me not digress. It is these reasons why we had to create something that was very action-centered. And we recognized that the action-centered also was very much a part of who we are culturally as a people. So the methodology was also speaking to the very cultural aspects, of our structure. We do things very much through movement and very much through formations. And so this is how we do things naturally anyway. So we thought, why not develop a practice and a praxis that exemplifies the very genomes of our cosmology. So further to that, you also asked, what does selecting, sampling, and sharing? So the archivists that are based within the organization, some of which used to be, one of them used to be a DJ, used to go around and play, Ibiza, all of them. So he's got that music background, and so when we were designing our methodology, we thought, what's so beautiful about music? When it hits you, it feels no pain. But apart from the fact that when it hits you, it feels no pain, what's beautiful about when we bring music and samples and various things and actions? And wouldn't it be interesting if people approached it in the same way? You select. So you select a piece of heritage history or archive or collection. You decide, which one am I going to choose from? There's so much about, the histories that I could choose from. So you make a selection. And then from that selection, you then start to sample different experimental styles in how you're going to interact with that story, with that narrative. You're not going to get it fixed on just a one westernized lens on how to approach a particular thing, which what we find sometimes in the curatorial space is that there's a style. And even although they say, oh no, there's various styles, there's actually, is there? You feel like if you're not formatting yourself within a particular style, then you are not fitting in very well with curatorial standards. But then we question in DTA, whose standards are we actually answering to? And if those standards are based upon a colonialistic structure, then no thank you. So it's very much designed to question and to provoke the colonial structure of doing things, and the hope is that the participants especially are the actual curators. We have absolutely nothing to do with it. All we do is create an opportunity which is enriched with little provocations to tell you, the various angles that you can take it. And the rest is left up to you to bring to the table. So that's pretty much what our methodology envelopes, and, in a summary, that's what it does. I don't know if I've answered the question.
Yeah, no, that's really amazing. I think, I love how accessible the language is and how we can relate to music, which is a lot more accessible than the archive and the arts, the visual arts a lot of times. And I think it's really important that we are interdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary, and we can learn from each other. I know that we don't have that much time left, so I'm going to start gathering some final considerations before questions. And so I wonder if Naomi, if you could share some reflections on how curators could sustain a more democratic practice for artists.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and I'm pretty sure every individual in this room will probably have an idea or a suggestion of how we do that. But I think for me and the work that I do and where I'm placed in the UK, I think it's really about being present and being responsive to the needs of the artists in that region. I'm thinking about a lot about what the word curator means, where it's devises from. It's, you know, it's the Latin word for curatus, meaning to care or to take care of. And care is a huge, fundamental, important thing in my role as a curator. And the care and trust that I establish with the artists that I'm working with, you know, it's about nourishing them relationships and actually simply just listening to what they need. You know, how am I able to do my job properly as a curator in a big institution and create programs and exhibitions for publics and communities and artists if we're not listening to their voices? So it's about continuing to kind of advocate for that and level the playing field and thinking about those underrepresented voices in the region, especially in the northeast of England, and allowing people to have a seat at the table and challenging, like, you know, the structures of institutions and the governance within institutions. Obviously, I know I'm preaching to the converted here, but education costs in the UK has tripled in the past 10 years. So it's becoming increasingly difficult for people to sustain a kind of education through the arts, and a lot of people are not taking up the arts as education or through the university route because it is so expensive. So there's some amazing work being done in the Northeast with alternative programs led by really grassroots organizations that are looking at alternative modes to accessing the arts. And you know, I'm really supportive of that and working with the likes of Bolt to kind of distribute funds and support to be able to support them networks and them programs. I just wanted to quickly also touch on what Connie just mentioned about style. We've been having a lot of conversations within the institution about taste and what we're taught at university, what taste is in the arts, and that white cube space and what curators exhibit in them spaces. And it's okay to challenge that, and it's okay to think differently. And these amazing grassroots programs in the Northeast are doing that because people are not coming through the university route. They're not having to have a master's. They're not having to have a PhD, and they're being able to come in and deliver exhibitions, be part of different programs, and have a really alternative outtake on what art is to them and what art should be look like, how it should be displayed in what institutions. And I think it's really interesting.
Thank you so much. Yes. Yeah, I mean, yes, that's amazing. Thank you so much. Okay, Connie, could you bring some thoughts on how institutions in the global north especially could share power and make space for communities from the global south? That's something that I witnessed you doing, so I'm interested in how do you do it?
Okay, so thank you, Beatriz. So you're talking primarily in regards to the University of Repair program that we've started. So that's directly speaking to your question, which is to put all of these people in one space, basically. We're putting in academics in the same space with local communities, with curators, with, you know, the little man down the road, the little lady down the road. Everybody is in one space, getting to talk and getting to feel like their say is just as important as anybody else. There's no hierarchical vibration in that. And that's the whole idea behind that. So I think to answer you, we've got to bring in a whole center sense of changing the canon, basically, on how things have been done. Because what that canon is representing is an old archaic way of thinking, which excludes people, excludes groups. We've expanded, we've evolved. And I think if more than anything, it's us as artists that have to bring that to the table, because we can't depend on our governments to do that. It's us. So the job of the curator is to ensure that that space is happening. And when I say happening, it's popping. You know, you know. So yeah, that's my answer. Get it popping. Yeah.
Oh my God, yes, Connie. Yes, well, yeah, and also having some really good lunch.
Oh God, yeah.
Yes, yes. Yeah, just making it fun. Yeah, you're so good at that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, Jasmine. Um, I would really love to hear some advice on how we can ensure a symbiotic relationship with communities, us as curators. How can we do that?
That's a very great question with a very long and multi-pronged answer. So I'll do my best. But first, I want to say what both of you said, I think resonated very deeply with me. One, that Connie, as you said, by whose standards do we do this curatorial work? And why should we be beholden to an antiquated and esoteric canon when as curators, we are tasked with pushing culture forward or facilitating culture through artists. And so the idea of a standard is diametrically opposed to creativity. And then to your point about school, you know, everything I learned about being a curator was not learned in a higher ed program. And I wish I could have that more than $250,000 back. I'm sure there are some people who can empathize with that as well. To the question about having symbiotic relationships with community, I think truly it is about being physically present in community and in conversation with multiple communities at the same time to seek out what the needs are and what the concerns and interests and joys are of those communities and responding directly to those rather than cultivating ideas that are then put into the community. While yes, you know, there may be some interest, I think it's more important to be informed by what people outside the sort of myopic artistic space are interested in. And again, also constantly having an evolving dialogue that isn't a one-off, but is truly a back and forth rapport, and really with an emphasis on multiple communities. Because when we talk about community, what or who are we talking about? Often we say community as though it's some sort of monolith, when truly it's composed of so many different facets and people and intersection. And I think maybe the first step is being cognizant of the fact that it's not singular, but a plural and pluralistic endeavor one has to take.
Thank you so much. Yes, no, that's amazing. Thank you, the three of you, for all amazing, generous answers. I feel like doing a project together. So we're gonna, that's a proposal, the beginning of a proposal. We are opening up for questions. People in the room can just come up to the mic, or people in the internet space can just type on the chat, I think.
No questions? Oh.
Hello, thank you so much for your amazing talk. I was wondering if you could speak a little about how to apply, because, you know, I work in Canada. There's a culture of artists run center. It's in my background. So when we're talking about experimental art, contemporary art, we see the space for decentralizing the curatorial much more clearly than in big institutions. So I wonder if you could speak about how to do that work of like rethinking the white cube, rethinking the spaces, making room for different kinds of modes of bridging the gap between curatorial, programming, education, and all of that that we've been discussing in bigger institutions, museums, for instance.
Sure. I'd probably come at it from, we'll start off about Newbridge. Newbridge, we class it as a kind of meanwhile space, because in the UK, I mean, I'm not too sure about here, but we get very short leases on buildings. So Newbridge has moved 5 times, I think, in the past 10 years, which is really challenging. It hemorrhages money, it's a strain on the workforce, it's a strain on the studio holders who are having to move all the time. So we often find ourselves placed in all, different kind of places in the region. And Newbridge, more recently, we've had to move out of a city centre. I say we, I'm no longer there anymore, but they had to move out to a city centre and straight into the heart of a community. And again, what you'd mentioned, Jasmine, earlier, in relation to what you said, a community that has gone through a lot in the past few years. It's a lot of privatized land being bought up by private ownership, and there's nothing there really for the community. There's not a pub, there's not a community space. So Newbridge had to do the work in advance of moving into that space. We had to, get working with the locals, the communities, and finding out what it is they actually wanted that space to be. And we knew it couldn't just be a white cube gallery space. It had to, be a space for everyone to be welcome to. It had to be a transformative space and work in several ways, actually. So, being responsive again, where one day it might have an exhibition on, the other day it might have 30 kids in there as a youth group and painting and drawing on the walls, and next day it might hold a knitting group with the local. So it's about evolving them spaces to kind of fit with the community that is surrounding you, and again pulling away from that white cube space. In terms of bigger institutions, I'll quickly say it's Baltic. So Baltic's huge, and again, obviously it's based in a region in the UK that has its struggles. And a lot of feedback that we got from Baltic was that people find it challenging from Gateshead in Newcastle to walk. It's a huge building, huge building, that they find it challenging to walk into that white cubed space. It's not for them. It's not for me. I'm not going to enter through them doors. So what we've done is we used to have a really bougie cafe in the front that was just soulless. Like you'd literally pay I think probably the equivalent of $20 here for a really naff sandwich and a rubbish cup of coffee. So our director, Sarah, who took over the institution, had this radical approach, thinking, right, what happens if that cafe doesn't exist anymore? What about if we turn that space actually into a free space that offers free tea and coffee? It's a learning space with books, it's warm, it's heated, it has free food in terms of fruit, snacks for children, and families can come into the gallery, can actually just be in there and eat their packed lunches there for free. What would that look like? And it was a huge financial kind of risk, but it's one that's really paid off for the institution. And as soon as you come into the building, that's kind of the first thing that you see. So straight away, it's kind of creating that narrative for people in the region who feel like they're unable to get over that barrier, or feel like it's, the white space isn't for them. So it's quite radical in its approach really for a big institution. So, I mean, yeah, I don't know if that kind of, I think it's rethinking those spaces, and it has to fit the community that you're surrounded by, right? And they should also have a voice in that, they should also,
Any other questions?
I don't need the mic, sorry. Sort of further to that, I love a solid example. Is there anything that you feels like transforming that cafe into a different type of space with a humongous success and was helping you achieve exactly what you were trying to achieve? Do any of others of you have examples where you're like, yes, we did this particular project or show and it's absolutely nailed what we were trying to achieve? Or conversely, put something on that just completely failed to gain the traction you wanted? I was interested to hear about these lunches too. That sounds
Connie, could you talk more about the community consultation with lunch?
Okay, I didn't hear a thing that the question that was asked. So if you could just say it for me, what was the question?
Sorry, they're just coming to the mic.
do you have any examples of projects that you've done that have particularly nailed what you're attempting to do? You mentioned the lunches, and that sounded like something that had been a huge success.
Okay, yes, sure. So examples of projects that we've done as DTA. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, that was very successful and did exactly what you wanted to do.
Okay, exactly.
Or
Okay, yes.
that failed
No problem.
completely.
Okay, so right now we've got University of Repair, which is a successful, it's an ongoing project, and it's really challenging the canon on what we call learning spaces in terms of university, and bringing the whole idea of reparative justice into the space. So that's one example. And that's the one that Beatriz is talking about, that has the Jamaican food. So, so that's one. But on a serious note, we also have another project that was quite successful, and it was looking at the Grenada Revolution. And what we were looking at was so with the Grenadian Revolution, what we found was that within Britain, there was a whole group of Grenadians who would come over through migration, and had communities over here in Britain. But that history of the revolution was very much kind of cut off from them, and not spoken about. And it was a very brutal revolution, meaning that it had a lot of ties with the US. And it also, it didn't just affect one country, it affected a lot of other Caribbean islands, because they all looked up to Grenada, who was doing revolutionary things in terms of education. They had the women taking over. The women took over the education systems and were teaching children. It was beautiful. And then one day, out of the sky, you had Ronald Reagan had sent over like troops dropping bombs on innocents. It was deep. It was deep. This is what was happening. So anyway, the long and short of it is we dug up those archives based upon a film done by a gentleman who was on the Ava DuVernay's film camp called House on Cocoa Road. And what we did was we tied in those archives with this man's story, which ties into the revolution and his mom being there, and his mom being tied to the Black Panther movement in America. Long and short of it, it just shows the intersectionality with all these stories and the Black experience through history, and how you can't really just localize one, because it intersects at some point. And that was very successful, because we were able to galvanize 500 members of the community, of the Grenadian community, in one space. And not only were they able to meet, but they were able to approach restitution in regards to the issues that were not addressed for over, like 40 years since the death of Maurice Bishop, who was assassinated during that. He was then Prime Minister, and he was assassinated during that time. But it also facilitated psychotherapists to be in the space, and to facilitate a self-healing happening within the community, to be able to talk with psychotherapists guidance in the space, facilitating a conversation that wasn't so much of a blame, who did this, who killed Maurice? No, it was more a situation of, what can we say as Grenadians we've learned about ourselves from this revolution? What can we say that we want to pass on to our children as a legacy? Saying, when you say you are Grenadian, what does that mean? Especially if you're outside of your space of natural, where you've been born, and you're now born in places like Britain or America. What does that mean? So, I mean, for anyone coming from a migration experience, that's going to mean a lot, because too many times our archives are disrupted in a way where the story is being told in a way like as if you're a bother and a hindrance, when really, when you follow the thread, you see that it was actually political unrest caused by a more powerful government that destabilized their country, causing then a group of people to having to migrate. And so yeah, so that was very successful. And that was an example of what we did. We married different faculties of thought together. So archives married to psychotherapists, married to geographical documentary makers, like the gentleman who made House on Cocoa Road. I'm trying to remember his name. Cannot remember his name, but he was under Ava DuVernay's camp, got in touch with Ava DuVernay. So all of that kind of thing, we put them together and gave that to the community, and the community served. They were just awesome. They claimed it as their own.
It's really amazing. Thank you so much. I think we could say that the youth program at the New Bridge project was quite successful. Just before moving to this new building, as Naomi was talking about, we started a youth program because we realized there were no youth provision in the area. And we hired a youth worker and a community coordinator, and they do weekly sessions, and it's been happening now for 2 years at least. And then as they get older, they sort of start getting responsibilities within the group, and then we link them up with organizations in the area for like work experience or like internships. And then we actually realized that all the artists that we would work with, they would be so interested in working with them. They really wanted to do something with them, and we could like support them and create, like help them to have that experience as well. And I guess the other side of that was also the Memory Cafe, which was a partnership that we did with a local cafe for elders in the area. So they would just come and do workshops, and that's still going, and it's really well attended. And then we have the opportunities to bring those groups together and have like an intergenerational conversation and bring the artists together as well. And it's amazing.
It's a beautiful thing.
I don't think, do we have any more? 2 minutes left. Any last questions? Yes?
Thank you for that talk. I wanted to pick on something that Jasmine said about the importance of curators being physically present in communities. I think it's a really important point, but I wanted to sort of go into that a little bit more and speak about, suppose, like the rootlessness of curators, but also communities at time. And I was thinking of something that, well, Naomi made me think, because I went to university in Newcastle, and also how communities can be quite mobile, I suppose, and they can face experiences like gentrification, and you'll know, like north of the Tyne, the whole city's pretty much been given over to students, like myself at the time. So how do curators perhaps reconcile these two phenomena of the curator often being quite mobile? I bet like most curators in this room probably don't curate from communities that they grew up in. They probably had to move, and also the fact that communities often have to move because of various phenomena, and how those two sort of situations reconcile with each other.
So the question being, I guess the first part of the question, how do you curate in a community that you're not originally part of? Am I understanding the question correctly?
Yeah, in communities that.
Okay, I got a thumbs up. So, I'm someone personally who considers myself to be sort of not necessarily have a origin place because of family history, where I grew up, sort of feeling like an outsider always. And so I don't think that you necessarily have to be from a place or have grown up in a place to embed yourself successfully in the community. And I think one thing I've been thinking about as we talk is this idea of curator community, artist community, whereas the reality is many of us, through vested effort, often are not separate from the community. We are part of it, or part of the communities in multiple ways beyond just our role as cultural producers. And so I think that is an important way to reconcile. It's not necessarily us as curators and them as community and what we're doing to serve them, but again, looking at this in sort of a symbiotic relationship that we are community. And it just so happens that what we are doing as community members is cultural production. And so that's kind of the way I look at it, is that we sort of, as we naturally embed ourselves as members and grow with the people around us, we naturally do the work And so there isn't necessarily something that is at odds. Now, when it comes to gentrification and questions of displacement and moving and sort of dynamically shifting communities, everything is always dynamically shifting and evolving. And I think what curators who are really genuinely interested in community can do is participate in ways to deal with that, deal with the sort of inevitability of unfortunate and often inequitable shifts in power. And so as that happens, to be part of change with our peers who are our community members, not just the community members we serve, if that makes sense. It's less about serving and more about being part of.
Yeah. Well, I think we run out of time. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jasmine, Connie, Naomi.
Thanks, Connie.